as you know, I need 500 sleepers for the new railway. But which sort? I thought it was worth experimenting with different types before I decided. So last time I looked at wooden sleepers, and today I'll show you some concrete ones that I made a little while ago. Concrete sleepers obviously need moulds. Something smooth and tapered so the cured concrete doesn't get stuck. I looked around and decided that plastic guttering might be perfect because it's the right profile and it's smooth. Except this one has little flanges at the top that needed cutting off. If you try this, go slowly with the saw because the plastic is brittle and can crack easily. Guess how I know that? Now, my design calls for 2 pegs sticking up out of the sleepers at the correct distance apart. The rails are bolted to those pegs and it's simple and it has worked well for years now. So I'm happy with it. But a couple of people suggested pushing the rails into slots in the sleepers instead, which obviously is even simpler and cheaper than my design. I know this method has been used successfully, but I'd worry that the rails would need to go in quite a long way to have enough support, sideways support, and then of course the sleepers would need to be deeper or they would get weak where they've been slotted. So more material would be needed. But my biggest worry would be that the sleepers would need to be very well supported or they might just fall away underneath and leave the rail hanging. That would be disastrous because the rail would bulge out sideways and tip over and the wagon wheel would fall down between the rails and the wagon would tip over and all the precious eggs would be broken. Calamity! Basically, my railway is going to be too rough and ready, I think, for this sort of method, the slotted rail method. Too wobbly and too uneven. But it's okay because my design can cope with that, so I'm going to stick with it. Of course, there are hundreds of other methods to attach the rails to the sleepers, but if the sleepers are concrete, then they all involve some sort of pre-drilled hole. My design is no exception. It needs holes for the upright pegs and those holes can't be drilled afterwards. They have to go in at the casting stage. I thought if I set up the pegs in pre-drilled holes through the moulds, then I could position the pegs easily and accurately each time. And that's what I did. The idea is the mould pegs will be removed before the concrete is really hard, leaving a neat hole through the sleeper in exactly the right place every time for the rail pegs. That was the plan. And I made a set of 3 moulds and mixed some cement. My mixer has stopped going round and round, so I'm reduced to the tarpaulin method, which is fine for small quantities like this. Now, as you know, concrete is very brittle. It's fine if you have enough of it in, say, a cube shape, but a sleeper shape is obviously asking for trouble. It's going to break in half, isn't it? So I put some wire in one mould as reinforcement. It has to avoid the edges though, and the peg holes, and so there's not a lot of room left for anything thicker than this. So really, these moulds are too small. But if they were any bigger, then they'd need a lot more cement and then they'd also weigh a lot more. I left one without any reinforcing wire. After all, this is an experiment and you can learn lots whether things go right or wrong. I added some glass fibres into the last mix. Not easy to distribute them properly, but no messing around with wires. So some advantages that way. And there we have it, 3 sleepers, sleeping softly and curing quietly. What do you think will happen? Will they work? Will any of them work? Will they all fail? Who knows? I just had to wait to find out. And that's part of the problem with this option. I had to wait for a few hours to take out the pegs, and then I had to wait 2 more days before I could take the sleepers out of the moulds. And even then, they were far from being cured. It would take weeks before they reached full strength. As you know, tiny crystals grow in the mix and interlock with each other to make a solid lattice. And those crystals keep growing and tightening for days, for weeks, for years even. That's how concrete gets hard. But even if I waited only 2 days to empty the moulds each time, then you can see how slow this process would be if I was to make 500 sleepers. Yes, I could make more moulds, let's say a set of 10 moulds, and it would still take 100 days to make all the sleepers. And don't forget all the work of mixing and prepping and filling and cleaning up afterwards. Not to mention the serious environmental downsides to using any cement, the mining and the processing and the baking of the ingredients to make cement powder. All very damaging, as you know. But there are good things about concrete sleepers too. Once they're made properly, they do last for decades, and of course they can be made strong enough for full-sized railways, so they certainly could be made strong enough for a 15-inch narrow gauge railway like my field railway is going to be. But to be made properly, the reinforcing rods should be under tension when the mix is poured, like reinforced concrete lintels, which are very strong because the bar inside keeps the whole lintel in compression, which is where concrete is strongest. But imagine the challenges in setting that up for ordinary people like me, actually stretching steel bar and lining that up through a series of moulds and still making provision for the through holes for the pegs. A lot of work and costly. Worth doing if you had a huge number of sleepers to make, but otherwise it's just too much money, I think. Now the other much simpler way to make sure that they are strong enough is just to make them much bigger. But these things already weigh 20 kilos each, 40 pounds, so you know, I don't know. Anyway, look, the sleepers I made looked quite good, but in fact they were all useless. The straight concrete one, you know, without any additives or reinforcement, was in 2 halves already when I came to film it just now. And the one with the wire reinforcement in it has an ominous crack right through it. But what about the one with the glass fibers through it? Well, yes, it might be the strongest of the 3, and it might have lasted in the field, but it might not have done too, so it's hardly worth the risk, is it? Anyway, there you go, some pros and cons of concrete sleepers. On this level, I think there are more cons than pros, but what do you think?